Hello, and welcome back to the 9 o'clock live. It is now, I think it's Monday. I'm pretty sure it's Monday. It's Monday. The YouTube folks, this is your first one in like a week because I was upstate and I couldn't do the YouTube. New York City folks or like Facebook folks, I'm back. And wow, so much to talk about. Now, I have been doing the live I was doing the live from upstate for the YouTube people. So I actually was covering things for the last week. But it was sort of reduced because I was with my family, so the lives were a lot shorter, what have you. But today I want to talk about the Democratic State Committee because we met. We actually had. It's Tuesday. It's Tuesday already. Did I do one of these last night? Did I do this last? Did I forget to do it? I must have forgotten to do it. Anyway, whatever. It is Tuesday because it was the state committee meeting. Okay, so I want to talk about the Democratic State Committee because we met today, and I need a haircut. Bro, my hair is amazing. Look at this. It's so silky and sweet, and look at this color. It's amazing. It's got like, I got to find some of the copper highlights. There's like gold highlights and copper highlights. And look, my hair as it grows goes through phases. Usually when I get my hair cut, first cut, it looks good. Then it grows out and it looks terrible. Then it grows out more and it looks good. If anything, this is just in like a momentary, doesn't look great phase, and it's gonna come into its own as it gets longer. Maybe I'll do some ponytail stuff, like samurai warrior. You know what I mean? I have this very high forehead though, so it looks kind of weird sometimes. But other times it looks great. I don't know. Look, Democratic State Committee. That's what we're talking about today. Folks want to talk about Trump, the Axios interview. I want to say one thing about the Axios interview. That thing being, if you haven't watched Flight of the Conchords, you should watch it because it's hilarious. But as a result of having watched Flight of the Conchords, I cannot take anybody with a New Zealand accent seriously. And literally, when I loaded up, I think somebody posted it on my Facebook and was like, "Not the Onion," and I loaded it up and I was like, "This is a parody, though, right? This is a joke." That so happens that the content is ridiculous because Donald Trump's ridiculous. But that's just the state of the world right now. Dorian Key, do you think the Senate will pass a corona relief bill before August recess? Yeah, I do think that's going to happen because, we can talk about rents actually as well because I had a long conversation with somebody yesterday about the situation for rents. 40% of folks in the United States are now late on their rent, 40%. And you simply cannot evict 40% of a country and have everything continue along as normal. So the government's gonna have to do something. It's going to have to step in at some point and do something about the wave of evictions that are coming because of missed rent. It's official. You're moving to Williamsburg, Kings County Dems. You should get involved in the party there because it really needs new blood. The Kings County Democratic Party is a bit machine and could use new young people who are not open to being told what to do and supporting the old guard getting involved. But that being said, let's do the state committee. Viewership is jumping up now, so I want to get to the thing that is uniquely me. So as folks may know, I am a member of the Democratic State Committee, which is the central organizing body for the state Democratic Party. We do a couple of really important things, and all of these things are happening in the next couple of months because the national convention is coming up. So today we had a meeting that had been delayed from basically May because of the pandemic, and we held it virtually. Now I do want to give props to our current chair, Jay Jacobs. He is actually very good about making sure that people's voices are heard and ensuring that there are votes and that process is followed. So whether I agree or not with Jay on actual policy, I really want to say that it's such a better case than it was when we had continual chairs attempting to shut down debate and refusing to allow people to speak. All right. That being said, the state committee did a couple of things today, and we have a few more really important things coming up in the next couple of days. First, today, we approved a slate of delegates to go to the convention. So for those who are unaware, when you vote in the primary for your presidential candidate, you are actually electing delegates to go to the national convention. about a third, somewhere between 25% and a third of delegates out of New York State are actually chosen by the state committee. They're not elected in the districts. So today we selected those folks, and it was a pretty big deal because technically speaking, under DNC rules, candidates who are not on the ballot or who have declined to run for the nomination are not eligible to receive delegates. However, despite this, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders got together and selected a shared slate of delegates. As a technicality under the rules, Joe Biden was entitled to pick all of the delegates and to have all of them pledged to him. He worked it out with Bernie Sanders so that even though all the delegates will vote for Joe Biden because there are no other people running any longer for the Democratic presidential nomination, about half of the delegates ended up being folks who were picked by Sanders of this cohort, which the Democratic state committee selects. Sorry, not half. A number proportional to the votes that Sanders got in the primary. I think it was a third or something like that. So that was the first thing we did. The second thing we did was pass some important resolutions. And I say that because one of the resolutions is one that I wrote. And this is one about the use of federal police officers to punish protesters, basically. And the state committee has now ratified the position that if these sorts of tactics are tried in New York and or Donald Trump attempts to use federal police to infringe on our civil liberties, the Democratic Party will support our local electeds doing whatever it takes to prevent those liberties from being attacked by the federal government, up to and including using local law enforcement to intervene in the work of federal law enforcement. So that I thought was a pretty important resolution. I had authored that myself. And then we also passed one in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. There were a few more that didn't make the docket, however, and one of those was the very, very large ethics reform package that I've been working on with many, many others for some time now, really getting it right. And no need to be worried, though. It's going to be brought up at a special meeting of the state committee on August 24th. At least that's what I was told, and I've resubmitted it. And now they basically have to put it on the agenda for a couple of reasons, for like a couple of technical reasons. But it means that it will at least be considered, and hopefully I'll get an opportunity to work with some of the other stakeholders and leadership of the state committee to build out a resolution and a rules change with which they're comfortable. I mean, a lot of folks have already signed off on it, but of course it helps, it pays to have leadership supportive as well. That being said, we're having a special meeting of the state committee on August 24th because we need to choose our electors. Now, you might recall that the Electoral College exists and that here in the United States, you don't directly vote for the chief executive. You don't vote for the president. Instead, technically speaking, very much like the delegate process, when you cast your vote for the president, you're actually casting your vote for a slate of electors who are pledged to vote for that candidate, right? So who chooses the electors? Well, it's the actual political parties that choose the electors. And the reason is they choose their slates so that when you vote for their party candidate, they can vet and make sure that the electors that are being sent to vote for that candidate are in fact wedded to that political party. This is why you don't see electors defecting very often. Even though that was a huge thing in 2016, you don't see electors defecting because they're all basically party insiders handpicked by state parties. That being said, we are going to be selecting our electors at the next meeting on August 24th. And if folks want to apply to be an elector, you can actually do so by sending a statement of candidacy, a one-page document, to the state party at info@nydems.org. So if you want to be an elector for the Democratic Party, feel free to submit. Just know that it's very unlikely, unless you've somehow proven and demonstrated that you will vote for the Democratic nominee come hell or high water, that you're going to get the spot. That being said, that's why we have to have a special meeting, and we could not vote on those people today because in order for us to choose electors, we first need to know who the vice presidential candidate is going to be, because presidential electors are pledged to vote both for the presidential candidate and the vice presidential candidate. And we needed to have the election of electors by the state committee after Joe Biden's announcement of who his vice president would be. So that's the second big thing that was on the docket for the state committee, and that's happening again August 24th. The third big thing, which we are told is probably going to happen at our organizing meeting in September, although it was not promised, and I would be wary about seeing whether they try to shove it into the August 24th meeting, seems unlikely, likely to be in September, is the election of DNC members. Now, this is big. You might remember that the DNC just voted down the legalization of marijuana or actually the National Convention delegates just voted down the legalization of marijuana for inclusion in the party platform. Well, a lot of those delegates are folks who are tied to existing Democratic leadership, and every member of the Democratic National Committee is an automatic delegate. So it's very important what these DNC members do and the things in which they believe. So New York State has 13 elected members to the DNC that serve 4-year terms, and we're going to be electing potentially new ones in September. So if you're interested in running for the DNC, same deal. You can file a statement of candidacy by expressing your desire to be on the DNC and writing a little bit about yourself on a one-pager and sending that to info@nydems.org. That being said, again, folks will tend not to vote for people they don't know, but there is probably going to be an effort, of which I'm a part, to try and get a couple of more progressive members on the DNC, and almost more important than that, to get actual representation on the DNC. Because right now, over half, there's only one member basically from upstate New York. Everybody else is from New York City and Long Island, the downstate region. And this is very unfair to representation of parts of New York that we really should be trying to win. And the perspective of Democrats in that area would be very helpful in our DNC delegation, and honestly, for the national party, because they come from areas of a blue state that don't necessarily always vote blue, that oftentimes vote red. Thusly, we're trying to get a resolution passed to help encourage the state committee to put on regional representation, or to improve regional representation from across the state. We also need significantly better ethnicity representation on the DNC delegation. It's about 40% African American. No, it's about 25% African American, which is proportional to the population. But then the rest is white, 75% white. We need 10% to be Asian, and then another 12 or 13% to be Latino, to have any claim that this delegation represents the people of New York State. As well, everybody's over the age of 50, I think. So it would be great to have a couple of younger individuals involved. And honestly, those are the voices that the party needs. So these are sort of the big issues that the state committee tends to grapple with. These are very important votes. The DNC election, for example, will help to determine the future of the Democratic Party and its national strategies for the next 4 years. And whether Joe Biden wins or Joe Biden loses, hell, there should be a full cleaning of house of the DNC. But even if Joe Biden wins, I think there's still a lot with which the party has to grapple. A lot of things that have to do with, ultimately, Donald Trump has proven himself to be completely unfit for the presidency. If Joe Biden wins, a large part of it will be because Donald Trump lost. But we cannot forget or ignore the fact that the current leadership of the DNC failed to deliver the election in 2016 against Donald Trump, people knowing that things were wrong with him. So whether or not Joe Biden wins or loses, the DNC needs a new perspective on organizing and reaching out to American voters. Simple as that. So this upcoming vote in September is actually, I think, a fairly important one. So please stay tuned for that. I also really think that the rules change that I've drafted and that a lot of other folks have helped contribute to is going to be instrumental in moving the party forward, because folks, I don't know if folks, the Me Too movement was gigantic and productive and valuable, and a lot of it seems to have sort of tapered off now that the battle against Donald Trump has really begun in earnest. But right now, the Democratic Party has no rules against sexual harassment or misconduct or discrimination in its bylaws. And the ethics proposals that I'm putting forward would include language to make those things illegal under the party rules, but also provide for an independent ethics process. Because right now, the ethics process is basically decided by party leadership, which means that particularly in a case where there are actual victims, the disincentive to bring anything forward and the concern that things would not be treated fairly is extremely high. So these are some really important facets. Oh, and it greatly expands the people who have to behave ethically in the party to all of the state committee members and all of the executive board members of the state committee. Right now, it's limited to a small slice of people who are in what's known as party leadership, such as the chairs and vice chairs and committee chairs of the state committee. So it drastically expands who's eligible to be ethical, and I think that can only be a good thing. So these are some of just the big things that we're grappling with in the state committee. And the state committee, like the Democratic Party as a whole, like the country as a whole, really is going through pretty big changes. And this is the time to get those changes done, because people realize for once that change needs to happen. After the next election, depending on what happens, the urge and impetus to actually make progress on all of the problems that we have identified over the last 4 years could very well die down. So this is the moment to do it. And that is why I'm spending so much time talking about the state committee. And really, I'm going to ask you all to pay attention to what your state committee members are doing and to pay attention to what the Democratic Party is doing, because with two major parties, what those institutions decide to do and how they behave and what they believe in and what their rules say and whether or not they're inclusive makes a huge impact on whether or not our political system actually functions well and is actually a democracy. Now I'm going to take some of these questions that have been popping up. Dorian Key, in NYC, didn't Cuomo pass something 2 weeks ago that prevents evictions for the duration of the pandemic? Cuomo has basically extended the ban on evictions, as far as I know, until the end of August. If it's longer than that, somebody please correct me, but to the end of August. Can you sing It's My Life? I'm not going to do that now, but maybe another time. Thank you. Dorian, do I count as a progressive, Ben? I'm going to say probably not, because you are a monarchist, which is regressive. That being said, I have to admit that insofar as actual perspective on modern policies within the established Republican democracy, you are decently progressive. You could be a progressive if you put your mind to it. How about I put it that way? How is Biden taking so long to announce his VP? It's all about the drum roll, man. Barack Obama, for example, in 2008, dragged out his VP pick and then convinced a record number of people to give them his phone number by saying, if you want to know who my VP pick is first, sign up to get the text message. So the VP pick is both a strategic objective. The VP pick is both a strategic opportunity to set the stage for the election, but also a tactical opportunity such that the way you announce your VP pick can dominate a news cycle and actually get people to take actions for the campaign. So that's why. Please let it be warned. Well, I mean, a lot of folks in the running. I don't care if it's not a black woman. Well, you're not black. The black vote, however, carried Joe Biden to victory. and is the thing which has been propelling the Democratic Party forward for years. So I think there's an argument to be made that Black people deserve a little love from the party. So while you might not care, lots of other people do. Now, I'm going to support whoever it is, regardless of whether or not it's a Black woman, but I think it would be nice if it were. Michael Kaplan, you don't need rules in your bylaws when it's against real laws. I'm not sure to what you're referring. Oh, you're talking about discrimination and sexual misconduct and sexual harassment. This is true that, well, first off, sexual misconduct needs to be defined, and real laws deal mainly in the realm of physical violence and physical harm, which is the criminal code, and it is the proper place for the criminal code to deal with those sorts of matters, and also not to deal with lesser matters of smaller misconduct, because the criminal court is really about jailing and fining and doing things when there is an abundance of evidence, and there's a lot of things to do. There are very high standards basically for criminal court, and for that aspect of the law. So there are things which you might want to prevent from happening in your organization, which are lesser than something that would appear in the criminal code under the evidentiary standards of criminal court. And that is why we have policies, internal sexual harassment and internal misconduct and internal ethics rules. It's to deal with matters like that. For example, one might say, why do we have, internal policies around race and racism? Those exist and they're good to have. Why do we have them if, hate crimes are a law? Because hate crimes operate at a higher level or a different level of attack, something that is physical and violent. Same thing with embezzlement. Embezzlement is against company policy, even though technically embezzlement and the stealing and theft of money, or really anything, is also something that's covered by the criminal code. But again, evidentiary standards are much, much higher, and the punishments, disproportionate perhaps to what you might see within the organization. So it is important to have outlined the conduct which is allowable and also disallowable within an organization. And then beyond that, we simply want to state what our principles are, right? We want to be able to say that, yeah, this is against our rules internally. And also there should be levels of escalation for these problems, right? It is a lot of money and time to take somebody to court. And generally it privileges the wealthier, more connected member or party in that dynamic. Within the party, we should want to have the capacity to conduct investigations and to find equity and undertake restorative justice, not just punitive justice. And that is the goal of writing these things into bylaws. So for example, Tara Reade and Joe Biden, she's not taking him to criminal court. She could never prevail in a criminal situation because the evidentiary standards are just too high. But should there be a mechanism by which leaders of the Democratic Party can be held accountable and in which people can conduct investigations and people can have faith that these things are going to be dealt with and that proper claims are going to be adjudicated and that improper claims are going to be dismissed? I think so. I think it's reasonable to want to have these things, and that it's furthermore important that political entities, really all entities, state upfront their values and ensure that those values are enforced, even if in the most egregious cases, something might be against the law. It is not ultimately the law, though, it is not ultimately up to the law and to the legislature to come up with the micromanaging policies that are internal to the daily machinations, though, of organizations, companies, and other entities. I hope that addresses your point. Dorian Key, Rashida Tlaib might lose her primary. She might. I'll have to look into that. I haven't really been plugged into that sort of stuff, honestly. Michael Kaplan, I think you nailed it. The black vote went to a white pres candidate. Black voters are comfortable with being represented by people not in that group. It's mostly black politicos who really care about being selected for reasons of their own ambition. A black VP would not be history-making following Barack Obama. I disagree with that. A black woman would be history-making. But the black vote did go to a white presidential candidate, but for a lot of different reasons and for complex reasons. Black voters might be comfortable with being represented by white people, but it's probably to do with the fact that they have had to deal with that and accept that for most of their lifetimes, right? Going back generations. I'm sure, I know for a fact, at least, that there are some outspoken members of the black community who want to see a black vice president because they want to see a black person in the White House. It's, and I understand that. As an Asian, I like having representation. I like it when there's diversity, not just in politics, but in media and all these other things that people look to see how society should govern and to see how society should be modeled. But, that being said, I don't want to just dismiss the idea that, sure, black people voted for Joe Biden, therefore it doesn't matter whether he chooses a black VP because they don't care about that sort of representation. I think that a lot of them do. Sure, Livia. Are any of the elected reps coming into these offices addressing TPT, third-party transfer, which stripped home ownership throughout New York, especially in Brooklyn? Why are we not making home ownership and deed theft and deed fraud a platform? Generational wealth is important. What happened to the TPT fight? That is a great question. Actually, when I ran for public advocate, I got involved with some of the TPT activists in Brooklyn, and I gave a couple of talks about, I do these civic education talks about how the Democratic Party works and how the government works and how judges work. And by the way, bad judges were a huge part of TPT and deed theft. So I gave a couple of talks about that, and I had, I had a huge concern about what was going on in these communities. It's particularly used against black and brown communities, yes, to rob them of that generational wealth, and it's absolutely abhorrent. That being said, these candidates for party leadership, so the electors and the DNC members, I don't know of any of them that are running on a platform of, that deals with illegal deed transfer or not. It's technically legal. I mean, there are aspects and things that have been done that are illegal, but it's really a perversion of the law that they use to get the deed from the homeowners so they can transfer to developers. And by the way, what I'm saying, sort of like off the cuff, might sound like it's a conspiracy theory, but because it's just so ridiculous to think about the government stealing land to give to developers from black and brown communities, but it is 100% true and documented, and you can look it up. It is like a serious problem, and the de Blasio administration is, some people in there borderline criminal activity, if not outright criminal. That being said, but the national delegates, the DNC members, they don't really deal with those sorts of local issues. They have no power or influence really over these sort of local laws or the things that this local government does. They're really there to set the policy agenda for the national party and to guide the national organizing agenda and how to spend the money to organize Democrats across the country. So the answer to that is no. But what I would say, insofar as third-party transfer, is look out for 2021 because we're going to have district attorneys up for election, and we're going to have city council up for election, and we're going to have mayor and comptroller and public advocate up for election, and those are the folks who do have the power over deed transfer at least the way it's being done in New York City. Your Congress members don't really have that much to do with it, honestly. Your state legislators, they actually could. Get your state legislators involved. Albany could put an end to it tomorrow because Albany technically controls the city, and the laws passed in Albany supersede city laws. So you should go after your state legislators and your city legislators and city executives for that. But what I will also say is what happened to it. Honestly, the pandemic happened to it. When I ran for public advocate in 2019, it was a big deal, and I was involved, and I knew folks who were fighting TPT. Then Donald Trump sort of started to assert, there was impeachment. Impeachment took up a lot of oxygen, and we forget this, but impeachment was this year. Impeachment talk started last year, and they were doing all the investigations, which really took everybody's attention. And then there was the presidential primary. It's a shame we didn't do more about TPT, about Bill de Blasio's when he was running, because it would have been a great time to sort of smack him on it. But then there was the presidential primary for the Democrats. Then there was coronavirus. And honestly, really, really critical local issues have just gotten no oxygen because everything's on fire. And fire eats up oxygen. That was a little science reference. I wanted to, I used oxygen for a reason so that I could say everything's burning. And what fire does is it oxidizes things, thereby using up all the oxygen, creating a vacuum. Anyway, whatever. Science, folks. But that's what ended up happening to the TPT issue. And honestly, it's such an important matter right now because people are losing their homes and people are losing their jobs and people are losing their, people can't pay rent. And so the idea of people keeping their homes is just so critical. But at the same time, because 40% of New York hasn't paid rent, the big real estate question is about evictions. And that's where all of the political attention is. Let's see what we got here. Shirlivia, I hope I'm saying this right. Shirlivia goes on, the black vote is going to white reps because our black elected officials sold us out. So at this point, we just want truth in front of us, white or black. I can definitely appreciate that. Having been involved in local politics and Brooklyn politics, I know of a lot of situations in which that has certainly been the case. And if folks trust Joe Biden, then, I'm not surprised that they're voting for him. Michael Kaplan, I was comfortable being represented by a black man. I think there's too much identity politics. Meritocracy demands that we be colorblind. All right, I'm going to say something about colorblindness, which is sort of a thing that white people talk about, mainly because they don't have to live being a certain color. The reality is that colorblindness doesn't exist because everybody's got their ingrained biases. And I have no problem being represented by Barack Obama because I think he's a smart dude. And I agree as well that meritocracy should win out over pretty much everything else. And that identity politics can be a distraction from who is actually the best candidate. However, it really needs to be said that sometimes what makes somebody the best candidate is their capacity to understand a certain perspective, which is not truly accessible to somebody of a different background. Just like very, very rich people, like the Prescott Bushes, who have been in power for a long time, can't really appreciate what it means to pay rent and live paycheck to paycheck. Which isn't to say that the Bushes aren't smart. I happen to think that they aren't, but, HW was a smart guy. I don't really have that much respect for Jeb or GW, and I know Dorian's going to go off, but whatever. But, there's one thing to be book smart, and it's another thing to have experience and be street smart and know. I know I'm a smart guy, and I went to school, and I have a lot of theory in my head. But the thing that really makes me good at politics these days isn't all the theory that was shoved into my head in my political science class. It was the on-the-ground organizing and trying to participate in the internal Democratic Party machinations. I learned so much about how this thing really works and how it can be great or how it can be an absolute disaster. And it's that sort of experience. And like, that is something that I get to choose to be. I get to choose to be a Democrat, and I get to choose to be involved at that level. Something I don't get to choose to be, which does shape my experience, Asian, Jewish. For people who are Black, that is an entire set of knowledge that they accumulate about what it means to be Black in the United States that other people simply don't have access to. And it's not to say that we should just have a rotating presidency amongst all the various identities of the United States, or that we absolutely must elect a particular type of identity so that we can achieve some sort of parity in the legislature, so that 20% is Black, so that half is always women, so that 10% is Asian or what have you. But we can't simply dismiss the idea that ethnicity and race matter in this country, and that the experiences that people have when they are both intelligent and qualified and Black, or intelligent and qualified and white, or intelligent and qualified and Latino or Latinx, that those experiences and the knowledge gained is different. And particularly when we're talking about policy, which, yes, has a lot of theory, but also directly impacts people living in a community, that information can be valuable. So certainly I don't think you're a racist person, which is why you have no problem with Barack Obama representing you. And, or you probably have no problem with any person of color representing you in the presidency or in Congress or in your local legislature. Sure. But I want to be clear that we can't dismiss the fact that the things that people encounter when they have a certain, when they are born into a certain class or socioeconomic or ethnic status, we can't dismiss that what the information and the encounters they have and experiences they have as a result are invalid. They are valid. Dorian Key, why would anyone store high explosives in the middle of downtown harbor? Just dumb, I guess. I don't know. Are you referring to Beirut? Regarding Beirut, who thought that was a good idea? Yeah. Is that what happened? Somebody was just storing high explosives in the middle of the city? Well, that's a bad idea. They shouldn't do that. Shirlivia, why is TPT not a national issue? That is my question. That's a bigger question. And some of it has to do with the fact that I am not 100% sure of what TPT, whether deed theft or third-party transfer is happening in other parts of the country. I have the feeling that maybe it is in other major cities, but I don't know the answer to that. And in order to answer that question, I'd have to know whether or not this is an issue that is truly national. I know that it's gigantic in New York, and New York happens to be a huge city, the biggest city in the country. But, I certainly don't expect an issue in New York to be a national issue just because it's happening in New York. So I would need to know more about what's being done in other parts of the country as it relates to TPT. Shouldn't we have timed impeachment for the election? Well, my doorbell's ringing, which means somebody's probably been locked out. I'll be right back. Sorry, but I definitely did the right thing answering the door. So it happens. Sometimes people forget their keys, There was a thought that we should have timed impeachment for the election, and that was a huge debate at the time. And, folks wanted to strike while the iron was hot, and there were all of these whistleblowers around the Ukraine incident. And so it would be probably not strategic to try and hold that off until the election and then refer back to something that had happened that was a threat to national security months prior, because you should really deal with the problem when it's happening. That being said, there was the chair of the Federalist Society, I think, a very conservative legal think tank, just came out the other day and was like, yo, I thought the Democrats were mad hyperbolic about Donald Trump trying to put off the election. But now that he said it, the Democrats should impeach him again and do it right now. If Trump refuses to leave claiming voter fraud, what then? Then there's going to be a lot of court cases and maybe a civil war, right? Dorian Key, you don't think Tammy Baldwin is a good choice for VP? I think she's a great choice for VP. That not to detract from the other VP picks, but it's more than who makes a great VP. And for me, who makes a great VP is somebody who makes a great president. It's also about the political dynamic and ensuring that the people who voted for you feel like they voted for the right person. Part of that has to do with who you pick to be on your team. Jeb Bush is super smart, or so you say. I haven't met Jeb. He's just very low energy. Is that right? The office of the VP needs to get more relevant. Yeah, well, you can talk about that with Dick Cheney, pal. It's a pointless office right now. Again, talk to Dick Cheney. In the French democracy, colorblindness is written into their laws. Yeah, but France is super racist. I don't know if you know that. The census doesn't have a category for race or ethnicity. That must be why the white French people living in Paris have absolutely no idea that there's a ring of poverty surrounding the city in the banlieue. Except that I guess they do because there were riots there in 2006 or something. Like, let me just put it this way. People rag on the United States and the way we deal with race and ethnicity. I'm not saying we're doing it right, but Europe isn't doing it right either. That's for sure. Ruth Mullen, male-female district leaders was meant to and did address a wrong, but now it is a wrong in itself. Yes. I mean, I think this is something that we're certainly grappling with in the party. I will say that the DNC members are the composition of the DNC and the bylaws of the National Committee refer to gender, men and women, not sex, male and female. And so there's actually a push to change the party bylaws at the national level to be inclusive of non-binary folks. Here in New York State, we have male and female based on sex written into the Constitution. So if we wanted to preserve any sort of parity between sexes and genders, we'd have to amend the Constitution for that. Or if we wanted to adjust the way we conceive of that, we'd have to change the Constitution. Shalivia, how do you suggest that we who are fighting for our properties beyond COVID-19, how do you suggest that we who are still fighting for our properties beyond COVID-19, how do we keep TPT and the corruption surrounding it on the table? It still must be addressed. How do we do that, and how do we keep TPT out of the vacuum so as to not let it be consumed by the fire of the pandemic? Steps. Okay, this is a really great question, and it kind of, I'm going to say a few things. These need to be tailored to wherever you live. So if you want to message me you're on the Facebook. So if you want to message me through the page, I'm happy to talk to you about it in more detail. It also really depends on sort of where you live in New York City. But generally speaking, the folks in charge of third-party transfer are the judges and the administration. So the mayor's office, the executive branch. The people who matter then are your Democratic Party judicial delegates who were elected in the primary this year, and your Democratic candidates for judge who were also elected in the primary this year. Then it's going to matter who becomes a judge in November. It's almost guaranteed to be the Democratic candidate. So to pay very close attention to how the judicial convention goes down in your borough. The next thing I would say is the city council members are integral in this because they actually have the capacity to put a halt to these transfers, and many of them simply don't know what's going on and don't pay attention to them or approve them thinking that it's something else. because the administration and the people doing this have done a good job sort of disguising it as a regular practice. The way, I won't go into the mechanics of how TPT works, but it has to do with the way that the city deals with abandoned property. So getting to your city council members is important, particularly if they are an incumbent and they're going to be running again in 2021. The next thing to do is to find out who is running, who's not an incumbent for city council where you live, and ensuring that the candidates know about this issue and finding one who is going to be vocal about it and helping them win, raising the money, earning them votes. And mind you, we have 8-to-1 matching funds here in New York City. So you might think that funding a city council candidate is difficult. And I'm not saying it's easy, but with 8-to-1 matching funds, every $10 you give them becomes $80, or really $90, because they get $80 from the government plus your $10. So, $10 to a candidate for city council is almost $100. And it really makes a difference. So that's the next thing. And the level up from that is getting your county-wide folks involved, your borough presidents, and then, of course, mayoral candidates. So those would be the first steps that I take. Look at your judges, look at your city council members, and look at your executive branch representatives like the mayor. And, and then I would be remiss if I didn't say this. The most important part, aside from just you contacting them, is getting other people together. A group of 15 dedicated people is incredibly, incredibly influential in a city council district. So find 15 or 20 or 30 other people to do this with you, and you will be a force to be reckoned with. And if you combine that with the small dollar donations to city council, it's going to make a big impact. And I'm happy to talk to you about it, but the more people you can get involved, the better off you'll be. Talk to your local Democratic political clubs as well, if they're not terrible. Michael Kaplan. All people should have the chance to participate at the entry level. It is a crime against the Republic to ignore a lack of opportunities at the most basic levels, arguably starting with education, and try to make it up for by selecting people for diversity reasons at upper levels of participation. Yes, but let's say that you have two candidates who are equal. So let's say that all the Democratic candidates are equally what's the word? Let's just say that they're all equally well suited to being president. We had a field of like 20 people, and I'd say about 50% of that was white men. The other 50% were white women and people of color. So if they were all equal in their merit, then if the electorate just broke down in a completely colorblind fashion because they decided that everybody was equal, then you would have a 50% chance of picking a white male and a 50% chance of picking anything other than a white male, which still gives tremendous privilege to the white male population, which is not to say that the best candidate isn't necessarily a white male. It's just to say that trying to be blind about the fact that women and ethnic minorities have a different experience from the people who currently hold wealth and power in this country, and trying to ignore the fact that they succeed in much smaller numbers as a result of those disparities is a disingenuous argument for why we should not care about those things. One, their perspectives are important, and two, when one of them happens to rise to the level of running for president and is deemed to be on par with candidates who have experienced more privilege, the odds of that person having gotten to that stage are much lower. And so the odds of actually selecting a candidate of that background is also substantially lower, even if you happen to see them on the debate stage or on the ballot. And again, this is not to say that the white male candidate isn't the best one. I happen to have my own opinions on how this particular Democratic primary went down. I also have my own opinions on how the 2016 primary went down. And sometimes I favor the white male. Sometimes I favor Elizabeth Warren. Sometimes I favor Barack Obama. I happen to like Bernie Sanders too. Okay. There are policy considerations. There are meritocratic considerations. And then there is the consideration that these folks bring different perspectives because they've lived different lives. I think it's fair to say that you and I don't have exactly the same opinion on things because we have lived different lives. And if that diversity of opinion matters, and we're going to say we're both equally intelligent, then somebody has to make a determination as to whether or not these two equally intelligent people best represent them. And part of that's going to be, I have an experience that is urban, New York City, immigrant parents, and minority. And you have an experience which is, I actually don't know, but something different, right? New Jersey at the very least, right? And people vote based on geography as well. It's the same idea. Like, I want somebody elected from New York. You want somebody elected from New Jersey. I mean, presumably not, because now I know that candidates from New York are trash, but, you know, you get the idea. I think, I hope. Dorian Key, do you think TikTok should be banned? Yes. Michael Kaplan, the doorbell is ringing and they never heard from Ben again. But here I am, folks. I survived. I know it was a very horror movie moment, but this is a positive show. This is a positive show. Dorian Key, when are your roommates coming on the show? I don't know, man. Maybe never. Maybe tomorrow. It could be anything. Dorian, do you think Ginsburg will last until November or if Trump wins until 2024? I do think she'll be able to hold out till November. I think another 4 years is kind of pushing it, honestly. I do think that, not that it should be a rule, but I do believe that if you're over 70 or over 75 and your party controls both the White House and the Senate, it's kind of your duty to step down, because the risk of having the opposing party ruin everything is very, very high. And of course, we want nonpartisan judges, but what we really need to do is reform the Supreme Court in its entirety, so it's not lifetime appointments and a bunch of other things. But given the current situation, the current context, that's sort of how I feel about the matter. Shrelivia, TPT is a national problem. I am currently in Washington, D.C., holding a protest for the displaced community of people thrown in the street by development companies who obtain their properties through TPT. I have signs, and people from all over the country came with stories of TPT in their states, honestly. I'd love to hear more about what you're doing and how that's going. But again, these sort of land use issues are almost always under the discretion and purview of local municipal governments. Sometimes the state can intercede because state law supersedes municipal law, but it's almost always up to municipalities, with the exception of Washington, D.C., which, even though it has a city council, is by constitutional law directly controlled by Congress. So there, your Congress member could actually do something, but you need the whole country to agree with you. What does TPT stand for again? Third party transfer. I can do an episode on third party transfer if people want to hear about it. It's a really abhorrent practice that is semi-complicated, and like your blood will boil when you hear about how land is literally stolen from homeowners by the government to give to developers for gentrification purposes, generally for gentrification purposes. Just nonsense. Dorian Key, if Trump doesn't leave office, won't the Secret Service just arrest him? Civil war over. I want to say yes, but I can't because I don't know. I suspect at this point probably, because Trump is nowhere near as popular as he used to be. And the Secret Service is a special type of law enforcement, but Donald Trump also has a special relationship with law enforcement. So, Dorian Key, did you hear about Trump ordering the census to not count illegal immigrants? I did hear about that. And it's illegal for him to do so, and unconstitutional for him to do so. And they also cut census counting or census door knocking by a month out of nowhere. Is there something we can do about that? simply just to continue to count everybody and ignoring the fact that we're not going to ask who's an illegal immigrant anyway, so we're simply counting people. Yes, for apportionment, but they don't know who's an illegal immigrant, so they can't actually do that. I mean, they want to do that, but they can't reasonably do it practically. Ruth Mullen, it's so hard to find out what's going on in the Bronx, easier in Manhattan. True story. But if you need folks in the Bronx, I can connect you with some. Bronx progressives are good. Sam Elise Lopez is a friend of mine. Michael Belzer. You should check out their work. Dorian Key, who's the people to know in Kings County Democrats? I would go find new Kings Democrats if I were you. They'll be a lot more accepting. Dorian Key, why was TikTok successful when Vine was not? Am I just too old to understand TikTok? The answer to your question is music. Music, music, music. People love music. Also, it was very easy to there are a couple of things. A couple of things that make TikTok explode. One was the music, 2 was how easy it was to use, and 3 was it racked up your numbers. Like, I'm not 100% sure whether it was all organic and legit. I guess it was, I don't know. But people racked up numbers and people liked using it because they thought they were popular. Just like when you go to Facebook and you're like, wow, I got 20 likes, I'm on fire. I got 50 likes, I'm on fire. People told me about how they would use TikTok once and then they would get 100 views and they'd be like, wow. I feel like people are watching the live, but I feel like, why are more people watching the live? Well, if I were doing this on TikTok, I could reach a much larger audience because their algorithm is just much more prone to sharing random stuff with people, at least as I understand it. But it's that engagement or that feeling of engagement that really drove people to want to use it. Please do a TPT live. Okay. I'll put together some research. Maybe I'll get a guest speaker on and we can talk about TPT. Actually, maybe by putting out a call for TPT speakers, it'll help re-elevate the issue amongst the progressive New York community because I'm pretty plugged in. Not to toot my own horn. I'm not saying that I'm a big shot, but maybe it'll get people thinking about it again. Michael Kaplan, my signal always cuts out when you reach my comment. That's too bad because I spent a good 10 minutes answering your comments today. Ruth Mullen, I know them, but still. The Bronx is changing, honestly. There was an article written in Gothamist about it, but it still is very difficult to engage in Bronx County party politics, admittedly. But I'm here to help if I can at all. That being said, we're at just about an hour, and I've answered all the questions, and I've said everything I wanted to say, so I'm going to go eat. Thank you all for tuning in. It was a pleasure seeing you again, back yesterday I didn't do the live because I was doing the It's Your Party segment for Downtown Independent Democrats. Yes, exactly. It was great. Okay, one more comment from Shalivia. More people, especially the Democrats, need to know the whole story and the dynamics behind third-party transfer. By the way, I was the woman who held the meeting on Nostrand Ave that you spoke at during your run for public advocate. I liked you then, and I still like you now. Oh, okay. Gotcha. I didn't recognize from Facebook. Okay. Yes, it's so good to hear from you. Thank you for that. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to hear from you. I would love to catch up and hear about what you're doing in DC, and hear about what's going on back in Brooklyn, if anything. And I will try to put together a thing about TPT so that we can have a talk about it and raise some consciousness and awareness. All right. And with that, I will see you all tomorrow at 9.